All right, welcome everyone. This is being recorded, so when the question and answer period begins, if you would like to ask a question but would rather not be kept on a recording, just let us know and we'll edit you out before sharing it. But yeah, on behalf of the Rudolf Steiner Branch here in Chicago, Illinois, welcome and thank you for your participation. We're pleased to have Johannes Kühl with us, who was born in 1953 in Germany, studied physics in Hamburg and Göttingen. After 1 year of research at the science section of the Goetheanum, he taught physics, chemistry, and mathematics at the Waldorf School in Stuttgart-Uhlenshöhe. From 1996 to 2020, he was the leader of the science section at the Goetheanum and a member of the Collegium of the School of Spiritual Science, where he still works. His research interests are Goetheanistic physics, the understanding of quantum physics, the relation of technology and human culture, and of course, anthroposophy. Thank you again, and I'll pass it on.
Thank you, Jonathan. And I think now it's my turn to say hello to all of you. And I'm, as Andre said, I'm speaking from the Goetheanum, and I will show you because it's possible that many of you have never been here. So, if there later are any questions about literature, here's my email address, or you can email the branch in Chicago and ask for the address so you can get the literature, because I don't quote literature during the lecture with pages and GA and so on. So this is, so to speak, generally where I am at the Goetheanum, and the leaves are nearly like that right now, not exactly yet. And that is the front view. Some of you may have seen on pictures or in reality. And one of the most beautiful buildings on the campus is our glass house, which is, which is this. And right now I am in this, under this cupola. You see there is a window, and that is right here next to me. So that's just so you know where I am. And now our theme, the theme we agreed upon was how we can approach the elements and the ether today. And it is interesting because that is not an example of, I might say, application of anthroposophy like pedagogic or agriculture or medicine. It is more a general topic, but it seems to be quite important in the anthroposophical approach, because Steiner mentioned it again and again during the lectures, starting with the lectures on evolution in 1906, and then going on, coming up again in relationship to pedagogic education in, I think, 1920, and of course then with the medical lectures, and it's always in the background, and even then quite important as a theme of meditation in the class lessons. So it goes through anthroposophy, but it is not or nearly not directly connected with the practical application or the practical anthroposophical work. And the other interesting aspect is that there are some anthroposophical authors, scientists, who worked on that theme, like in the beginning, the first leader of the science section, Günther Wachsmuth. His first two books are mainly about elements and ethers. And then I know at least 7 different authors working during the last century on elements and ethers, publishing books or articles on that. And it seems a little bit to me that every generation of anthroposophists need to develop their own new approach or their own understanding of this theme. So it's a little bit, yes, something like an ongoing topic. And I will just right now show you a list of these elements and ethers. It's close to how Rudolf Steiner described it in the warmth course, the second scientific course, mainly for the teachers. But I would like to mention one of the books of the lecture series where they are described from a different, totally spiritual point of view, which is, I think the English title, or one English title, is Inner Aspects of Evolution. This is the most wonderful lecture series, and if you don't know it, read it. And we will come back to that. So I will show you this list now. So that is close to the warmth course, and there we have these earth, and he identifies that with every solid: water and fluid, air and gases. So sometimes people say the elements are different from that. They are, but we won't go into the fine structure of that. And fire and warmth. And then the next step is, oops. Sorry, something wrong. There we are. The light ether, it's called, the chemical ether, sometimes the sound ether, or even the number ether, and the life, oops, what's that? Life ether. And that's just how we find it in the lectures of Steiner. And then it's a question how to deal with that. Can we come to an understanding? Oops. And I will try to show you how I did that, how I'm doing that in 3 steps. The first step is to explore them a little bit phenomenologically. And the second step would be, is there something in ourselves, in our soul, which corresponds to the phenomena? And then the third step would be that I would quote for the elements how Steiner coined, so to speak, some key words for these 4 realms. So we start with the earth, with the solid, and of course we know quite well the properties of a solid body. It remains how it is, and we can picture its form. And So we know we have it in front of us and we can go out and speak with somebody and come back and it's still there. It remains, it keeps his form, its form. And interesting is that, of course, in the physical world, we wouldn't find something which is really solid. For example, take a fruit. It's quite solid, an apple. Now I have to choose fruits for the other countries. But let's imagine an apple, and we know it stays there at least for a few hours. But after a few days, we see the form is not the same. And when we look at a mineral, it will stay the same for a few days, for a few weeks, even for a few years. But when you go to millennia, even minerals wouldn't keep the form. And now the interesting thing, and that is already the second step, is how do we know that? We look at a crystal. Come on. Like that. And how do we know if it changes? How do we know that there is, so to speak, a mistake? Why would we call that a mistake? And when you think about that, you realize what is really solid. It's not so much the outer form, it's much more our own inner picture. It's our own inner picture which is really solid, and in our mental pictures we have much more solidity, so to speak, than in the outer world. And the outer world is changing when we are changing and walking around, and through our mental picture we can hold it. And it is interesting that that is something some of these 7 authors, I didn't tell the names from all of them, but for me quite important are Joachim Bockemühl and Georg Meyer. And in the 17th, they realized that this is not only something connected with our inner picture, but even something how we look into the world. We can look into the world from the view or the viewpoint of solidity. And then everywhere we picture solids. And that is because we understand them so well. That is the case today. We will come to that when we think in science, we think about gas. We picture flying molecules, flying solids. So it's quite difficult to transcend this view of solids. Even the first step to the fluids, to water, is quite difficult. And when we try this step, the first thing Steiner points out quite extensively in this warmth course is whereas solids have their own form and individual forms, water doesn't. Water has, in a way, only one form, and that is the drop. And even the surface of the ocean is like a big drop around the earth. So there it is more dependent on gravity, and the drop, a small drop, is more dependent on surface tension, but it is always this round sphere when it's left alone, so to speak. But it is very interesting when it starts moving. Because when water is moving, when it's flowing, on one hand, it's following the form which is there. Like it's doing in every vessel. You can pour water in and it will take up the form of the vessel. And if it's flowing, it flows in the offered form, a channel, but in the same time, it forms the channel. So when you look at a river, then you can see up in the mountains, the water is very clear and very clean, but it runs down quite fast and takes with it minerals and rocks and even trees or something, and forms the landscape. And on the other hand, at the mouth of a river, it's very slow, very broad, and it's formed by the landscape, and it's connected with the world, flowing into the ocean and then connecting with the world. And whereas the situation at the source in the mountains, it's very local. You know, there is this source and with these rocks and these vegetation and so on. That is a local situation, and at the mouth it's connected with the earth. And in between, like it is with a good polarity, in between we have the rhythm of the meander. And the meanders are a wonderful example of this double phase of water, that on one hand it follows the landscape, and on the other hand it forms the landscape. And of course, everywhere where we have water, it's so wonderful to look how water plays with the light, or the light plays with the water. And therefore, I have probably too many pictures of that because I like them so much. So I will show you some of them. Come on, there we are. So this is still a solid. Here you see water in action. This is in a valley in Switzerland, very close to myself and some friends. And there the water has formed these, so I can show you this, in the rocks. Oops. How do I do that? Come on. Now I know. And if you are there, it's extraordinarily loud. You can nearly not speak with each other. Water forming the landscape. And here you have the opposite. Water playing with light in the same valley on the other side. Some of you might know this poem of Goethe. It's called The Song of the Spirits Above the Water. Gesang der Geister über den Wassern. And Goethe wrote that poem facing this waterfall in the same valley. And here you see again this meander, again in the same valley. I love it. And the whole valley is formed by water. So a little bit close up. And that is just a beautiful picture of the river Rhine, where it has a waterfall, Schaffhausen, and you see how it plays with the light. And now that is more the situation at the mouth of the river, wide, connecting with the whole earth and playing with the light again. Okay. So if we look inside, what do we have as a quality in our soul which correlates to water? And that is when we have that sort of movement in ourselves, which on one hand has a certain force and on the other hand follows something outside, like the water in the river, a certain force and following. And that is, of course, when we are thinking. When we are thinking, we need our strength. And when you observe how you understand something, how you understand any problem, you see you do that by moving in your thinking from one object to the other and relating one to the other. So it's an inner movement, but it's not deliberate. You have to, like touching the laws. So if you try to think 3 or 2 times 4. 2 times 2 is 4. 2, that is okay. Now try to think 2 times 2 is 5. Try to think that. Not only, it's easy to say, and if you try to think, it's like touching a wall. So it's like when the river touches the bank. You have to follow the laws, but you have to move. So that is this aspect of an inner movement, inner forming movement of thinking, which relates to the water. There is even a wonderful article in German, unfortunately, where different forms of thinking are related to different forms of fluid motion. So other people explored that as well. And of course, speaking of water, there are so many aspects and so wonderful relations to water. I would like to mention the whole social aspect, how water is treated, how water is water a custom, or is it for everybody shared commodity, a commodity at all? So there is a social aspect, a spiritual aspect, and of course a scientific aspect. It's just so special. I can't, of course, we can't touch every aspect of water here in the context of the elements. I just wanted to express my admiration for this element. And now, very different when we look at air, because normally we can't see it. We can't look at air. There are only a few gases which have a certain color, like chlorine or brome or something, but only very few gases. Most of them are colorless, and air is colorless. And it's even surprising sometimes, why are we sure up in the corner of the room there's air. We can't see it, but we are sure. So it is something special that air has always the tendency to disappear from appearance, from visual appearance. And of course, it has no specific form. The water already was, so to speak, retreating from having a form, and the air is totally without any form. For example, it is impossible to say how high the atmosphere of the Earth actually is, because it just gets thinner and thinner and thinner and thinner. So the air takes up any available form, and we have nearly no perception. And a few days ago, I had a wonderful perception, because when we think of fluid motion, for example, of water, we think of the water flowing down a surface, a river, the street, whatever. And I looked at snowflakes. There were still a few snowflakes a few days ago here, and there was not a flow. They were dancing. So they were just there and there and there and there. And I thought it is an image of air which is much less specific, and even in the movement, and much more dancing. And on the other hand, there is so much what we experience due to air. We can breathe. The animals can breathe. The plants, in another way, can breathe. And it's even sometimes really surprising if you think, when you look at black coal, maybe you have something for to heat a grill or something, or a piece of black coal, and you realize all the carbon which you can get from a tree came to the tree from the air through the leaves, not from the roots. And it's surprising, you have this piece of black matter and it came from the air. And then there is this huge realm that we can speak with each other, that we can listen to music. That wouldn't be possible underwater. It is interesting that the velocity of sound in water is faster when the pitch is higher. That means every sound is distracted underwater. Therefore, the divers can't speak. They have signs they do to communicate. And for the air, the speed of sound is, for most pitches, very close or the same, and so we can speak. And understand, not only speak, but understand. And even our daylight, the blue sky that makes daylight, we have due to air. And that is something I think which is a very meaningful gesture, that in the air itself is nearly vanishing from appearance, but it helps other things to appear, like the plants, like the sound, like the daylight. So it is a sort of selfishless gesture. And I have a nice poem about this. Wait a minute. I don't know. There I have tried to make some pictures of air, which are of course not pictures of air. These are clouds, but they have these nice forms of dancing. And there we see this, sometimes it's called the rays of the sun. Of course, it's not the air, it is droplets in the air or dust in the air where we can see it. But I thought I wanted to show it to you so you can see that too. And the picture is taken in Greece, as you might see from this temple there. The reason I took it is because what would you think, but this is not connected with the elements, more with geometry, but you can think, oops, what would you expect if these rays expand over the center, over the zenith, over the center of the sky? They can't go further apart then. And what would you expect then? Interesting question. They come together again at a point just opposite to the sun. And that is nearly impossible normally to see. And in that situation, I saw it, and therefore I took the picture. So that already is the next step. We will come to the poem later. The next step, the fire and the warmth. And there, of course, even the question of a form, doesn't make any sense, is nonsense. You can't think of a form connected with warmth. And in this warmth course, Steiner emphasized that the warmth has this possibility to appear and really disappear. For example, when you boil water, you reach the temperature of 100 degrees Celsius, and then you can put on warmth and warmth and warmth and fire and whatever, but the temperature will not rise. It will stay with 100 degrees Celsius, but the water will transform into vapor. So it can appear and disappear and reappear when the vapor comes back into water. And so the warmth is something which is already, so to speak, on the border between space and outer space. And out of that reason, Steiner describes it as one side as an element and another side as an ether already. It is acting in space, but can disappear out of space. And when we look at it, how it works, how it affects the world in space, we always see that it is impulsating, accelerating a process, initiating a process, and always with this gesture, something disappears, really disappears, not only from appearance like air, but really disappears, and something new appears. That is the gesture, so to speak. And even a real fire, you have seen it. A real fire has this gesture. The wood down there will disappear, and the smoke and the light and the warmth and the ashes will appear. Sorry about that, I'm not so. And here in this tablet, I put together these qualities: earth, which is supporting, with its form, it is supporting us; water and fluid, which is forming; and air and gas, letting appear something; and fire and warmth, with this impulse. And we look, if we ask ourselves, what is in our soul connected with this impulse, we can look at certain activities, like for attention. If we pay attention to something or someone, when we have awareness of something, when we take over responsibility of something, that is something where we have this impulse, where we sacrifice something from ourselves for something or someone else. That is, even when we are working, we have this quality in our souls, which are always this attention, responsibility. These are qualities, activities of the human eye. And when we look at these lectures I mentioned, inner aspects of the evolution, then we can compare what we see what we learn from the elements with what Steiner described there. Can I move these? Yes. There we see, for the solid, it is simple death. Nothing is changing anymore. For the water, he calls it creative resignation. So it's creating the landscape, for example, but follows the landscape. And for the air, it is, and that is a little bit, I didn't know exactly how to translate it, giving virtue. In German it is schenkende Tugend, giving virtue, so that air is giving something as a sort of virtue. And for the warmth, it's sacrifice and courage. But when I mention these qualities, these four qualities, just like that, it's quite abstract and quite not as they are developed out of the activity of spirit, only out of the activity of spiritual beings working through the four stages from Saturn, Sun, Moon, and Earth. And these lectures, inner aspects, are like esoteric lessons on the elements. And which I find interesting is that they can be related to a phenomenological approach of the elements. And then we go on to the ethers. And if we try to approach the ethers without clairvoyance, it is quite interesting that it is possible by observation and by paying attention how we come to a process. So then it is an approach which is, even if you are not clairvoyant, is possible. And we will start according to this list with the light ether. What can be meant when Steiner just coined the name light ether? What can we understand by that? And if we observe ourselves, what happens when we are in a dark room, maybe for some time, and then only a small light comes up. Suddenly, we can connect ourselves with the space. We can orientate ourselves in the space. And it is like, yes, this orientation is a sort of a gift from light. And one should add at this point that if you are in a room where is only light, for example, when there is mist outside, dense mist, and everything is white, then you can't see anything either. You need light or brightness and darkness to orientate yourself. And then if you observe what you really see, then you realize, of course, that we don't see the light, we see pictures or colors. But these pictures and colors are connected. We see the sun and we see the brightness and we know these are connected. There said, we know. How are they connected? And when you do a little bit of theory of knowledge, then you know correlations, connections are always a result of thinking. So it is, we connect the image of the sun and the bright spot on the earth by thinking. So some people think if you have a torch, there's coming light out of it, like water is coming out of a garden hose. And if you use a torch, it feels a little bit like that. But physicists would tell you there's not anything flying out of the torch. Only very simple pictures of physics would tell you there are photons flying out of the torch or the laser or whatever. There are no flying photons. And it's all the physical models and theories like waves and photons and so on, they help to understand the connection of the pictures. The bright picture of the laser, when you look into it, better not, and the bright spot on the screen. All these models help to understand the connection, and one could say in our tendency with the solid view, we try to imagine something which helps us to understand this connection. But the reality is there is a context a context in space which we perceive by thinking. And that is quite interesting because with the elements, we have our senses. And here we have our thinking. Thinking is, so to speak, an organ, becomes, so to speak, an organ of perception. And when we say that, or when we realize that, and maybe it's difficult to realize in just a few minutes, when we realize that, we see that now it doesn't make sense to think, to ask what is correlated to light in our soul, because it is already connected to thinking. It is already connected to thinking, and it is, so to speak, opposite to the elements. The elements are something we see outside, and then we look at something in our soul which correlates. And here we have something in our soul and see it is working outside. The light is working outside, which we perceive by thinking. So thinking as an organ of perception for this. And of course, if you know already, you know me a little bit, I couldn't retain from putting on some images of course, it's not light. We don't see the light, but we see the light playing with water again. So this is in the morning, and there was snow on the trees, and that was melting. And then we have these many drops, and they play with the light. And I wanted to show you that, and maybe the next one, where you see then when the trees, the plants play with the light, it forms these circles. Wherever you look through branches on a light source, on a bright image, you see these circles. And of course, it's impossible to miss this sort of playing of light and water. Okay. So when we go on to the chemical ether or the sound ether, again, we could ask ourselves, what is a chemical reaction? For example, think we have a solution of a salt, water solution, and we put a little bit of an acid to it, and then something white falls down. The solution, is that the chemistry, or the acid, or the white powder? No, the chemistry, what we mean by chemistry is the process of transformation, or one could say the metamorphosis of matter. The clear liquid changes into a different clear liquid, and something white falls down. So it is again a transformation, a context. But when light describes a context in space, chemistry looks for a context in time, metamorphosis in time. And not only metamorphosis, but in the beginning, we have a sort of rest, the liquid, the acid. Then we do something, the metamorphosis takes place, Then we have again rest. Still the acid if something is left, the new solution, and the white powder. So it has always to do with a context in time and rest. And that's the same in music, where you have a tune and an accord. And the quality of the accord is connected how it is surrounded by other parts of the music. And so it is again a context, but not in space, but in time. But like every context, it is perceived by thinking. And we have the same relationship. Thinking makes us perceive something which is reality in the outer world. Even if you have an chemical formula, like, for example, methane, CH4. What does that mean? Of course, ordinarily, we would say it means 1 atom of carbon and 4 atoms of hydrogen are there in the compound. But when you try to approach it phenomenologically, it's very, very difficult to find something like that, to really find something like that. Even only the tetrahedron structure is possible to find, but not in the gaseous state. So it is quite well hidden. But the real meaning, the practical meaning is, if you have this methane, you can, in a certain relationship, get carbon and hydrogen out of it. It means the CH4 means the possibility to produce out of that carbon and hydrogen, or the other way around, to produce this gas out of carbon and hydrogen. So the chemical formula points in the direction what is possible and where it came from. So it is I think it is a quite wonderful aspect of the chemical formula, other than this more solid view of it. And so we have again this context perceived by thinking, and it is special in music and in chemistry. We have these laws of small integers. A sound sounds good to us if the relationship of the frequencies is of low, small integers. And therefore, Steiner, I think in 1 or 2 places, called this ether not only chemical ether, but number ether. And now we can look at life. When we think of life, we always think, of course, of an organism. We don't think of life in an abstract way. Life as an organism, and the organism always is something which is separated from the surrounding, but at the same time connected with the surrounding. And I would like to mention that a few years ago, an anthroposophical biologist, Bernd Roslenbroich, published a book where he described through evolution how the autonomy of the organisms increased. And the autonomy of the organisms are, so to speak, the basis for freedom. So the evolution goes in a way that the basis for freedom, or the ground for freedom, is developed. And he published his first book on that topic with Springer, so it is in the open world, not only in the anthroposophical context. He published it in 2009, and you might remember that was the year where 150 years of Darwin's The Origin of Species, and his book is called The Origin of Autonomy. And so that is something, the organisms develop autonomy, but at the same time, connection to the surrounding. And of course, all the laws of physics and chemistry are present. People tried again and again to find how the laws of physics or chemistry are overcome. But one couldn't find that. The laws of physics are present, or the laws of chemistry, but they are organized in a way, they come together in a way that they serve a higher concept, that they make this autonomy possible. And that is quite interesting. So the specific property of an organism is that it is able to organize all the laws in physics and chemistry and so on, so that they serve the higher purpose. That is even well described in this book of the American physicist and writer Fritjof Capra, in this book, The Web of Life. And I think that is quite important that we see life means organizing all the other laws in a way, processes in a way that they serve the organism, the higher concept. And this organizing process mostly taking place in rhythms. It's all, the organization is mostly in rhythms. That is what life means. I think it's not just an unknown force. When we speak of etheric forces, we picture them a little bit like the force of a magnet, and or the mechanical force or electrical force. We think a little bit, when we hear the word force, of something like this. And the life is, I think, more a thing of context and not so much of force, even when of course, I know that Rudolf Steiner uses this expression of etheric forces and compares it with a magnet, but not in the same way. So I think that is something at least to consider. And again, this principle that it is organized under the towards the organism, and we can find that even in how genes are expressed and so on. And my colleague Johannes Wirtz has published about that, how genes are expressed so that the organism can live with that. And so again, there is something we can understand, we can see by thinking, and then we see it happening in the world. And it is in a way like similar and totally different than the solid, because the solid is individual, this crystal or that rock and so on. And here the organism is individual, but of course living. So it is comparable to that. And now let us think, in the end of this presentation, let us think a little bit, what does that mean? Is it just some consideration to understand anthroposophy and a little bit of contemplation and so on? Or is there more to it? And I would like to describe shortly 3 aspects to that. The first aspect is we can know quite well what it means to be perceived, what it means to perceive someone or something. Amongst us human beings, we know quite well if someone recognizes us, it means a lot. And if it is impossible to recognize another person, we are just a little bit confused. I can tell you, just from my daily work, I just help out in our Waldorf school close to Dornach, teaching physics again, like 25 years ago. And all the students are wearing masks because of COVID. Now try to learn the names of people you don't know, but who are wearing masks. You only see the eyes. So it's quite difficult. And we experience this problem not to recognize each other. And how much more does it mean if someone asks you to do something and you think you can't do it, and the other person says, of course you can. I know you can do it. Try. That is something where this recognition, that being aware of someone, paying attention to someone, can mean a lot. And then when we think, of course, it means something for ourselves too. And when we think of nature, we can think and maybe having in our mind how Steiner spoke about beings in nature, beings connected with the elements. What does it mean that there are some human beings who try to become aware of that, become aware of the elements, become aware of this 4 or 7-fold qualities, which are, so to speak, the building blocks in a totally different way than we normally think about that, of nature. Therefore, we use the word elements. And when people think of elemental particles, it's just like borrowed this concept from the elements. So that is the first thing, to realize what it means that someone is recognizing nature, and what it means for nature, can mean for nature, and what it can mean for ourselves. The second step, yes, I wanted to show you a verse from the calendar of the soul. Here I put these qualities all together. The 4 ethers, the 3 ethers, warmth, and the elements. There is the poet about air I told you about. by David White, who is an Irish and American author, and he has a very special relation to nature and is a poet and writer and even gives courses to businessmen and leadership people to find something in their relationship with nature. And this poem is like, we shape ourselves to fit this world. And by the world are shaped again the visible and the invisible working together in common cause to produce the miraculous. I'm thinking of the way the intangible air, passed at speed round a shaped wing, easily holds our weight. So may we, in this life, trust to those elements who have yet to see or imagine, and look for the true shape of our own self by forming it well to the great intangibles about us. We see this relationship between nature, the intangible, forming ourselves. Yes, a friend gave it to me and I found it interesting, and I wanted to use some native speaking poetry too. And here I have these two verses from the Calendar of the Soul by Rudolf Steiner, where we see that this quality I was speaking about. One is, in August, I feel at last my life's reality, which, severed from the world's existence, would in itself obliterate itself, and building only on its own foundation would itself bring death upon itself. So death of oneself. And later in November, I feel at last the world's reality, which, lacking the communion with my soul, would in itself be frosty, empty life, and showing itself powerless to recreate itself in souls, would in itself find only death. Now I have to find how to, oops. There we are. So there in these verses, we find expressed the meaning of our awareness for nature and the meaning of nature for ourselves. That's the first step. The second is when we are cultivating, for example, a landscape with water, air, light, and so on, we are using the elements, and it is a sort of application where we use the elements in a sort of artistic way to form nature. And some people might think that is against nature, but it is interesting to know that there are many examples where cultivated landscape has, for example, much more species than uncultivated landscape. For example, in Europe, we would have huge areas of only wild forest with very few species, but the cultivated agricultural landscape which was developed here has much more species, at least before industrial agriculture. So cultivating, forming landscape, even if we use it, even if we cultivate landscape around buildings, is an artistic way to connect with the elements and ethers. And the third approach I would like to mention, and this has a sort of religious dimension. Rudolf Steiner suggested to the young doctors, especially to Mr. and Mrs. van Deventer, they should go out, observe nature at a certain place every day, look how the plants are there, the trees, the water is falling, whatever, and then do their meditations there in nature. Very interesting connection to nature. And we know about the northwestern European initiates of old time. They even had a Christ experience in observing the interplay of water and light and clouds and rocks and so on. And out of that, the Christ being was even called the Lord of the elements. And the Netherlands priest of the Christian community, Bastian Baan, who lived in the United States for some time, wrote a book with this title, The Lord of the Elements. And in this book, you find a story quite interesting. One of the founders of the Christian community, Rittelmeier, asked Rudolf Steiner how it would be possible to experience the Christ in the etheric. How can that be possible? How can I do that? Rittelmeier always asked quite spiritual, practical questions. And Steiner's answer was quite interesting. That is only possible if you learn to experience Christ in the cycle of the year. A totally new view on the calendar of the soul. Experience Christ in the cycle of the year. And when you look what it means to experience the cycle of the year, you see it has to do with the metamorphosis of light, with the metamorphosis of the organisms, the warmth. So we are in these rhythmical processes of the ethers when we follow the cycle of the year, and there is the possibility, or in a way, a sort of goal is not the right word for that, but is striving that has to do with the being of Christ. And when you look at these three steps, you can see that this relation, to develop a deeper relation to the elements and the ethers, can have a sort of scientific meaning, and it can have a sort of artistic meaning, and it can have a sort of religious meaning, all connected in cultivating, developing the human being, and at the same time cultivating and developing the earth. Sorry it took me so long, and I admire your patience to sit in front of the screen. But if there are some questions left or anything, I would be happy to be here a little longer. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Johannes. Let's see, we have over 100 people here. So for the sake of order, I'll start by asking if you have a question. I should mention too, we have some people on the telephone. So in order to indicate that you have a question, you can do *9, and that'll indicate that you have your hand raised. And for the rest of us, if you have a question, please indicate so in the chat box, perhaps with Q, and then I'll try calling on you. And if this proves too burdensome, I'll just allow everyone to unmute and ask that we try to be respectful in proceeding. So please. All right, I'll try giving it a few moments more, and then I might just allow people to unmute. Oh, I see a hand raised. Yes, Carla, I believe you should be able to unmute now.
Yes, thank you. Greetings for everybody. It's a pleasure to hear Mr. Kühl here with us. And I was thinking during the lecture, hearing his words, something, well, I am a class teacher here in São Paulo, and we work with several different subjects as class teachers. And my reflections here were, we can recognize many aspects of these elements and ethers that Mr. Kühl brought to us in different myths of different civilizations. And that is something that is very interesting for us teachers to make some connections, because we start guiding our children through the sensorial contact with nature, but also through these mythical aspects that we tell them from the fairy tales on the ancient mythologies and so on. And so I thought it would be interesting to bring it up for everybody, because it is also a soul element that we can put together with everything that Mr. Kühl brought us. And the question would be if he, Mr. Johannes Kühl, if he sometime goes into that way, putting the phenomenological observations besides some mythological aspects that we can find in many human cultures.
Am I asked to say something to that? I can do that with every culture, of course. And sometimes I try it in some topics, and I didn't try it so much with a little bit with the elements, more with other topics I worked on, like rainbows and atmospheric colors, but not so much with the elements yet. But of course, it's important and relevant. I understand that very well.
Thank you both very much. I know that there's a number of people there. The Lori Anskochko.
Hi.
Hi.
Thank you so much. One question was that I would have associated thinking with air. And even the soul calendar for this last week, you know, in German, in äußere des Sinnes als verliert, like, I mean, just that thoughts go into distances.
Yes.
Could you please elaborate a little more, because you've thought on this, the difference between, or why thinking is not connected with air as opposed to water?
I think the aspect I was connecting it with water was this forming quality. And what we have with air, I don't know whether I was clear about that. What we have with air is that other things appear, and the air itself more or less disappears. And that is something we have in thinking too, but it's a slightly different moment. For example, when we think of something and then an idea comes up, which some people would call an intuition, or connected with Steiner, one would maybe say an inspiration. Depends on, we will not cling to the words, but this process of movement and then something new comes up, that I would connect with air. Yes. Where are you from? Muted, yes.
Oh, I wonder if I have to ask you to unmute again. Sorry about that. I think at this stage, I'm just going to allow everyone to unmute. But oh, and I do see another hand raised. So I'll let you answer that question first, and then I'll call on Anna.
I'm a eurythmist who's living north of Toronto.
Oh, yes, in Canada.
Thank you very much. Anna, would you like to speak?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Kühl. And I'm not sure this is adequate to the theme you're focusing on today, but I was wondering if you could say a little bit about how the counterforces work on the elemental realm. Maybe just a little. Thank you.
Yes, one could think about that, but it would open a whole new page, so to speak, and I would prefer to skip it today. Yes.
That's all right.
But it's good to think about it.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. I see that Tom has his hand raised.
I just wanted to ask, so many physicists today seem to be questioning themselves. And in many cases, they're saying with the new discoveries, black holes, dark matter, they suddenly start saying the laws of physics will not apply there. And I was just wondering if you had a reaction to that, and the idea of physics and chemistry and how they serve us.
And I quite couldn't understand the question of that. Of course, we have these special observations of objects like black holes and dark matter, where we still don't know exactly what that is, but it would never mean that what we have in physics is all totally wrong. So what we experienced in the last decades and is that every new step puts the old things in a new perspective, but not that from that the old things are totally wrong. So I wouldn't expect something like, oh, we were totally wrong and therefore everything needs to be new. So, and even when you look at something, and I will try to describe that in this next lecture on the electron, even if you look at something like what today is called the system of elemental particles, even there you can find aspects which, or the development of stars, you can find aspects connected with anthroposophy. Is this an answer to your question?
Oh, yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you much. I see a hand raised, and I've noticed a number of people unmuting themselves. I'm not sure if that's an intention to speak. So
Yes.
yeah, go ahead.
I would happily speak. Herr Kühl, can you speak to us about the concept of etheric or spiritual geography? We have the landscape around us. My profession is a landscape architect. I'm retired now.
Wonderful. Yes.
But how the landscape shapes us as human beings and how we shape the landscape as human beings. You brought up the interesting point that there are many more species in a cultivated,
Yes.
I'm assuming agriculturally cultivated landscape.
Yes.
But can you talk to this theme of etheric geography?
I think it is a thing, it would be another lecture. I worked a little bit on that.
Uh-huh.
And I have a colleague who is working on that and wrote an article which was too long for the journal. So it is a little bit in process.
Uh-huh.
And I think it's not something one can just answer. There are very few lectures where Steiner mentioned. I only know one where Steiner mentioned that. And of course, it has to do with the landscape and the quality of light, which is very different when you are at, I know that quite well from the coast of the Northern Sea and the Baltic Sea. It's very different, and but it must have to do with this relation of what is perceptible and yes, you experience through perception. So that would be my approach, just for saying something in 30 seconds.
Was this article written in English or
No,
German?
in German, of course.
Can we get a hold of it someplace? I'm fluent in German.
Okay, if you can send me an email, I can send you the article.
That
Because
would be wonderful.
Yes, and this guy actually lives right now on one of these Scottish Isles.
Huh.
So to study this Western European qualities. And so my email address is very simple, because you know my name.
Yes.
Everybody knows my name, and it's just Johannes.Kühl with UE, because the internet doesn't know the German Ü. And then you know where I work, at Goetheanum, and the Goetheanum is in Switzerland, CH, which means Confederatio Helvetica.
Johannes Kühl at
.ch.
Goetheanum.ch. Great, thank you.
You're welcome. And someone asked to project the charts again. Shall I do that, Jonathan?
I'm sure that'd be appreciated. Yeah, thank you.
That put most of it together, because here we have the spectrum of nature. So from solid to life. And you see there's always this connection of life-centered, solid-centered. Water, fluid and forming, chemistry, metamorphosis, and form. Air, letting something appear. Light, letting other things appear without appearing itself, and warmth in the middle. And here is, unfortunately, it's a little bit different from what I tried to make on PowerPoint. These are the the qualities we thought about with the ethos, metamorphosis and rest, context in time, with light, letting appear, context in space. And here are the four qualities of the elements: the impulse, the inner aspect in the soul, awareness and attention, and Steiner's mantric words about sacrifice and courage. Air, letting something appear, the phenomenological approach, the corresponding in our soul, having an idea, an insight, and an inspiration, and Steiner's word, giving virtue. Water, fluid, forming, taking up a form and forming itself, connected in our souls with thinking and inner movement, and Steiner's word, creative resignation, and the earth supporting us, like the inner pictures, our mental pictures, which are essential for our well-being too, supporting us, and Steiner's word, death. Did it help?
I do hope so.
Yes, I do too.
Yes, thank
I
you.
have a question.
Yes.
Is that my question?
Yes.
Yeah,
Okay.
I mean, there's a number of, yes, feel free.
Can you place, or will you place, the northern lights within the ethers and the elements?
Yes, of course one should do that, but I'm a little bit careful how. Because it is a special light. It has to do with chemistry, because it has to do with certain material. We know nitrogen and oxygen under certain influence of cosmic radiation. And so I think it is very close to this whole context of spectral analysis, and that it has to do with the relationship between chemistry and light. But I'm careful, as you see, to just say it is this or that, because I need to think a little bit more in the context. Sorry.
Thank you.
Thank you. I still see a couple of hands raised. Walter, would you like to ask your question?
Yeah, sure. Thank you first, Johannes, and I really appreciate a very artistic presentation. My question, I know it's getting late.
I'm sorry, let me try to mute this person.
We shouldn't be plaguing you with too many questions so late at night, but you've given us a little bit of homework. I think essentially what we have here is that we're trying to lead us into experiencing how our inner life and our thinking life is related to the elements. And so we almost are composed of the elements to a certain extent.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
That's kind of summarizing
agree,
a little bit.
yes.
Yeah?
Yes, I would totally agree with this with the connection to the elements.
Right. And so now what's our homework? What's our next step? Let's say, okay, it's difficult to do this, what you just described. Difficult enough. You know, okay, we have aha moments, but, you know, to really get it, where are we going as we move along this path?
Interesting question. So I have a bad answer to that. My answer would be, I can only tell you where I try to go. And I think there people are so different, and how they can approach that. And some might deepen their relationship to that part by meditating with the class lessons, and others might go into nature and experience something there, and maybe even connect that to their meditations. And that's something I try, and try this path of Van Deventer, to go outside, observe one piece of nature and do my meditation there. But I think it's quite different for everybody. Yes, that's what I can say. I can't say the next step would be that.
Okay, good enough.
Thank you very much.
But our night guard is going around. Thank you. Danke.
Great. There's at least 3 more questions I know about. Are you still able and willing to handle those?
Yes, if we have this opportunity.
Sounds great. I believe that Christina was next. If you still have a question.
I'm still there. Thank you very much. Thank you, Johannes and the Rudolf
You're
Steiner
welcome.
Branch. I very much am interested because you use the word content in understanding how Steiner means the word force in explaining the elements. I mean, in explaining the ethers. And he does this in a couple of different locations, of course, but his word has been force, or strength of the ethers. My question is, if you're using the word content, the impact, context.
Yes.
Oh, see, okay. So then my question changes. Yes, the context of how we then inwardly in our soul, how we understand and can make living the ethers through the content of our different inner awakenings. So I'm just saying, I'm just very curious, this relationship between the ether forces as world forces, world phenomenon, and the impact in my own personal individual biography in giving expression to the context of these enormous ether forces that are part of world phenomena that all human beings then have a relationship with, and how I in turn would interpret through the content of my own biography. I'm trying to put this into a better question, but I find it totally amazing that you have given this word context to these great etheric forces that impact all of nature. And as I am a being in nature and the world, and working with these elements, I in turn bring content into understanding through my higher eye, imbued with the Christ being. I in turn bring content in understanding, especially as you were saying, through understanding this rhythm through the year of the calendar of the soul and the being of Christ.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and of course you have qualities of these etheric aspects in your biography. It's a metamorphosis through time. But like the life of an organism, the biography is not the same for everybody, but it's very specific. And so right. In a way, I think these concepts of the etheric as different sort of context opens possibilities to perceive qualities in other realms like biography and so on. I once suggested that we name our institute in Dornach Institute for Contextual Science, because I thought phenomenology of context is the science of the etheric. Look at different sort of contexts, but that there arose some difficulties, so that only happened under the table.
Wow. Thank you so very much. I am so appreciative. This is such a potent look into what the ethers are as a context. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let's see, because there's a couple hands raised. There's people who've reached out to me individually, and there's a couple people unmuted. So I believe Theodore is next.
Thank you, Mr. Kühl. I was thinking of Paul Emberson and moral technology, and then you mentioned this work on geography from, I believe you said Scotland. And has that come out of that lab of Paul Emberson's? And I do not speak German or read German. I would love to be able to understand this geography. And also, if you could say something about moral technology. I know you said you're going to be speaking about electronics, and maybe you're going to cover it there. But if you could say a few words, thank you.
So when I'm going to speak not about electronics, but about the electron, the concept of electron. That was something I just chose the title a few years ago to provoke some biologists because they think they know what an electron is. So, but your question is, I think this approach to landscape and to look how it is possible to connect with the elements in these regions of northern Scotland or Ireland, that is something worth and maybe helpful. And I don't know much about the actual work of the group around Paul Emberson, who passed away a few years ago. And I thought a lot about what this moral technology, this concept of moral technology might mean. And I think it can't mean that we have just a machine which we put on the table and which gives us energy for cleaning and doing the dishes and driving around, but it's moral and has no impact on nature or no bad impact. So I think morality can only come into the world through the human being. And that means moral technology needs to be, if we use the word moral connected with technology, it needs to have to do something with attention, with responsibility, with these sort of moral qualities. And when you look, for example, at biodynamic agriculture, you see you need this sort of quality of connection to your farm. It's not done with just spraying the preparations. That is not moral technology, but to pay attention, to be aware of processes and so on. So I just don't think that moral technology is just another machine. but that's my approach, because I was bombarded with questions about these sorts of machines during the last, how old am I? 50 years. And I think it is, even when you look at the mystery dramas where Steiner brought up this idea of the Strada machine, when you look at it, everybody is excited about this machine. And in the whole drama, there is nothing about energy from that machine, nothing. And there's one person who never mentioned it, who's not excited. Who's that? The main character, Benedictus. He's not encouraging to build it. So I think it is something, yes, it is not just required to build another miracle. So, sorry, it's a little bit heretic, I know, but I try to orientate myself in that realm.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I know that it's getting late. We'd originally scheduled another 10 or 12 minutes. Is that still comfortable for you?
Yes, of course.
All right.
So that we finish around, what is it in your time, 3 o'clock? Yes.
In Chicago, it's nearly 3, yes. All right. I believe, well, let's see. Florian, you've been unmuting a few times. Did you have a question? I guess not. Helena?
Yeah, thank you. I
I'm
just
sorry.
want to ask when Mr. Kühl, when you talked about the air and the tree, and something from the air came and formed the tree. See, I didn't get what you wanted to tell us.
Something, I couldn't understand it quite well. The air is forming?
Yeah, you talked about something came from the air and you put it in connection with the tree. And I wanted to know what does the air do to the tree?
Yes, that is quite easy and ordinary, because when you have wood, solid wood, and you heat it in a good way, you get coal, carbon.
Yeah.
And you can realize that the coal which can come out of the tree is not there coming up from the roots, but it is assimilated by the tree and by the plants through the air, from the air. So when the plant picks up with photosynthesis carbon dioxide from the air, it condensates that through different stages to carbon. That's what I meant.
Oh, okay. So.
More clear?
Yes, I appreciate it very much, and thanks for your wonderful presentation. It is all a little bit, it's difficult to grasp it all.
Yes, of course, and in front
very
of the screen.
difficult, yeah. So do you mind repeating it for me once more? The condensation of
the air, the carbon dioxide in the air
yeah.
is, so to speak, condensated. I say so to speak because it's a chemical process, not a physical condensation. Condensated through different stages of matter, sugar, starch, and so on, until you have only carbon left.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Okay, I know there's a couple hands raised. I just want to double check before I move on. Florian, did you have a question?
Yes, I just wanted to touch upon Steiner's last address to the members, where he speaks of from nature to subnature. And that particular last written work makes it clear that this topic of the elements and the ethers is of great importance in our time. If I just read this one part of it, he says that this makes it urgent for man to find in conscious experience a knowledge of the spirit wherein he will rise as high above nature as in his subnatural technical activities he sinks beneath her. He will thus create within him the inner strength not to go under. In this longer part of this letter, he speaks of our whole civilization having the danger of descending into this world of subnature, below nature. And I think the signs of the times are a manifestation of that actually happening in our time. And anthroposophy has something very significant to offer, but how can we get beyond just preaching to the choir? This is a very foreign language to the general public. How can we build bridges? How can we sort of at a time when more people are seeing the shadow side of technology, more people are becoming paranoid about electricity and 5G and where we're heading. How can anthroposophy reach out to those people and avoid becoming just a spiritual elitist society that is encompassing a small part of humanity that has a remedy, but how can we apply it? How can we get people to receive it?
Of course, this is a very interesting and moving question. And I think I would like to change the approach a little bit. If you think the world has questions and I have the answers, that is maybe not very helpful. But if you consider how you have your own questions connected with anthroposophy, you are interested in something and ask your own questions, then you can become interested in the questions other people have and even in the results other people have. And then there can come up a sort of communication. And it is not just me giving the answers, but coming in a sort of conversation and communication about questions and problems we realize we have. So I think it is a little bit important to change the view of that so that it's not just we bring the answers to the world, but can we connect with people who have similar questions and maybe even similar answers?
Thank you.
This is good.
Thank you.
Thank you. We have a little shy of 5 minutes left, and I know that there's 3 people with hands raised, 2 visibly and 1 who reached out to me. Do you feel comfortable trying to handle all 3, or?
Yes.
Sounds good. I believe, forgive me, Valdemar, did you still have a question?
Yes, thank you. Johannes, Thank you very much for the wonderful lecture. Maybe I'll be able to translate you here in São Paulo sometime, as I did before. I have just finished writing a book on the infinite, which is in print. Infinite in geometry, in the sets of numbers, and in physics. I would like to ask you, and in this book, I tried to convey the idea that when one thinks about the infinite, one is not able to think in the same way as our senses and so on, what comes from our senses and so on. And I would like to know your idea about two types of infinite. The infinite large, the borders of the universe, and the infinite small, the elementary particles. Can one say that if one takes the theory that the universe is expanding, it's expanding to where is it expanding to? To nowhere. How far goes the nowhere, right? So my idea is that one could say to anybody, right, that at the borders of the universe, the matter disappears, okay? Now to the elementary particles. The electron is not a tiny ball and it doesn't revolve around the nucleus. One doesn't know what an electron is, right? It's modeled for simple atoms in quantum mechanics, right? Very well with modeling. But quantum mechanics is not understandable. Many elements of quantum mechanics is not understandable. So is it possible to say to the world that when one gets to the infinite small, matter disappears? In the same way as it disappears, we could say that it disappears when one goes to the infinite large.
I'm not sure whether I can say anything to that question. I don't know. It is a little bit like, yes, it's very difficult to approach that question in a phenomenological way, and that's how I try to work. And then I have the feeling I just need to speculate, and therefore I'm hesitant to say anything to that. Sorry.
But the fact that one is not able to understand these two opposites, right? It has to have some meaning, right?
Yes, and it is interesting. It is interesting that in mathematics we have this concept of infinity quite clear and approachable. But if we connect that with physics or with the sense world, we have difficulties.
I believe I've muted them now. Sorry about that. Would you like to say anything more, or shall we move on to the next question?
No, I would be glad if I can need not to say anything to that question.
All right. Well, thank you very much. Paul and Joanna, did you still have a question?
Yes. Hi. Thank you, Johannes, for your lecture. This is concerning the question that Riddlemeyer asked Rudolf Steiner about connecting with the etheric Christ. And I believe Steiner said that we should get to know the Christ through the course of the year. I imagine by observing the natural world and the elements. So did you or did have any elaboration on it, or did Steiner elaborate on this as a way to connect with the Christ through the course of the year?
No, we don't have. We only have this notion by Riddlemeyer, and it was for all the time. It was only written for the priests, So I didn't know about that, only read it in the book of Bastian Barn, and now it's published because Rittelmeyer, a book is published from Rittelmeyer's conversation with Steiner. And so, but it's more or less only this. No, so you have to find, as it often is in anthroposophy, you have to find your own approach.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I see one final hand raised if you're still game, Johannes. And that's Giuseppe.
Yeah, of course.
Thank you. Giuseppe, do you still have a question?
Excuse me. Well, I have written the questions. The first is, when humanity used the nuclear energy to take lives in Hiroshima, Nagasaki, did the humanity go into a state of sleeping? I asked that based on the blood atherization. Where Steiner told us that we have I try to show you that the vital ether is of the end of the infraphysical deviation superior.
Mm-hmm.
It have to have relation with the assurance.
Mm-hmm.
And at the Steiner period, humanity didn't use the nuclear energy, and Steiner called this terrible force of destruction, and making a link with Valdemar Setzer's answer question. When we go to the nuclear, we can't imagine the matter, the substance, and we can destroy the matter, transforming it in energy with nuclear energy in a reactor or in a bomb. And Steiner says in this publication too that the assurance takes the deviation superior, the superior deviation, to a sleep state. Okay, the inferior deviation, the element of Ariman, takes us to the dream state, and the astral world, the element of Lucifer, takes us to the awake, the state that we are in this moment. And he relates also this awake to electricity, the electricity that is able to make us talk about this subject. And the electricity have a appropriate property of dispersion. We can separate the poles of positive and negative charge and take it away in a capacitor, or and it remains a dipole. But in the magnetic dipole, we cannot take immanent, take the north and the south poles far away. They are together as the concentration field, the magnetic, the electricity at dispersion, and the nuclear disintegration. The ask is, if when humanity used this nuclear force to take out the vital etheric of persons, humanity goes to a deep sleeping state. That was my question. Thank you very much.
I think one can think of that, of course, and it is not that clear that humanity is going to a sleeping state. It's not that clear, and I'm not sure, because there are some sides of this whole use of nuclear energy where you can think some people are just sleeping about it, but I don't know whether that has to do with this taking lives by nuclear energy. And yes, it is. I wouldn't be able to answer that concisely, because of course I know what you have at your back from this lecture about the etherization of blood, and it raises a lot of questions, what the relationship of magnetism with chemistry really is, and can we find that, and so on. So I'm careful. I can't answer that better. It is possible, but I can't say yes or no. Thank you.
Thank you.
And it's difficult to understand. Obviously, the connection to Brazil is not that good. I don't know.
Thank you very much.
I understand. I understand. The connection is good.
Huh? No, not that good.
No. It's written in Portuguese here. The vital etheric, and the chemical etheric, and the light etheric. The light etheric connected to electricity, chemical.
Yeah, we know that. Yes.
To magnetism. Okay.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Johannes. Thank you, everyone, for participating.
Thank you very much for making this possible. And thank you all for your patience and your interest.
You're welcome. Thank you very much. And it's May 8th yet that we have you again to speak?
I think probably. So it's in the emails by.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much. I look forward to it. Do you have anything to say, Andre?
Yeah,
before
May
we go?
8th. May 8th is in my agenda too.
Great. Thank
Same
you.
time?
I believe so.
It's going to be 1 o'clock in Chicago, and I will send extra announcements. Also, dear friends, if you would like to immediately connect to our branch, so please send email to me, and I will put you on the list. So, but thank you so much for participation and for joining us, specifically our new friends from Brazil and from Korea. So, and thank you so much, Johannes, for your outstanding presentation. Thank you.
There are people from Korea. I saw the names. I need to get greetings to them. Unwa, still there?
Yes, I see reaction.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yes,
greetings. Okay, Unwa and Don Min, her husband. Okay, thank you very much.
Dear friends, until May 8th. Thank you. Bye-bye.